I'm Jez Benton, and this is Route to the Top. I'll be meeting with a whole range of leaders who'll climb a mountain together and do a video podcast from the summit. I'm going to be hiking Ajax Peak, 12,500 feet, with Jessica Bailey, the CEO of Nuveen Green Capital. So yeah, Ajax Mountain in Telluride. We just had a fantastic hike up.
Yeah, let's do it.
So when was the last time you were interviewed, and what was it about?
The last time I was interviewed was yesterday, and it was about how Local Law 97 in New York City is going to fuel investment opportunities for commercial real estate.
And the audience was or is?
Commercial building owners and investors.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it wasn't done on the top of a mountain.
It was not done on the top of a mountain. I was wearing far more clothing.
Yeah, we can edit maybe the headline or something like that. But, well, first off, thank you so much for doing this. You must have thought it was a bit of a strange request. And it's a great spot to do it in.
Yes.
So it's just called Route to the Top, as you very well know. So let's talk about the route. So if I can wind the clock all the way back to Yale.
Okay.
And on the way up, you told me a little story about a job you nearly got.
That's right.
When you graduated from Yale. So why don't you give us the quick route to the top of Jessica Bailey?
Sure. So I graduated college in 2001, 2 months before 9/11, and really thought that I was going to have a career in foreign policy. International politics was sort of what I was interested in college, and then went to graduate school for international relations. Got there, took a whole bunch of courses on foreign policy, sort of expected my path would be into DC. Was actually recruited by the CIA, was not accepted into the CIA for reasons that are beyond the scope of this interview.
You too psychologically damaged and violent or something?
Well, the funny thing is if you don't pass their background checks, they don't tell you why. They just send you a very nicely worded letter saying, thank you for spending 3 days in a windowless room in Langley, but we don't require your services. But actually, interesting moment. So I don't get that job, decide not to move to DC. My now husband at the time and I were graduating, and he had a job offer in New York. I thought, all right, well, I'll figure out something to do as it relates to foreign policy in New York, which is not that easy to do. I spent the summer working at the United Nations. I didn't think necessarily that was for me, and ended up, after I graduated, at a foundation called the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Came in a super general role as special assistant to the president, which basically meant I was kind of doing everything he was doing, and a lot of what he was doing had to do with foreign policy. And it was huge exposure to all sorts of world leaders and really cool initiatives that the foundation was funding. But I got really taken with this idea of energy policy. Energy policy sort of being the thing that if you solve it, and you solve it right, you can fix a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Like solving for a pattern, right? Fix energy, you get a whole bunch of national security issues solved. Obviously, climate change, economic development, all sorts of cool things happen if you can get the energy system right. So got into energy policy at the foundation, and moved into climate change policy, and came up with this kind of harebrained policy that was happening in California that kind of sparked what ended up becoming Greenworks Lending and now Nuveen Green Capital. Yeah.
So straight from the foundation into co-founding, right?
Co-founding, well, there was a stop along the way. So the foundation, my job was to promote policy, right? So fund advocacy efforts, ultimately. So it was the state-based policy that called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, that I was funding efforts to get passed along the country. It was going really well. We were getting these policies passed. But the policy was really intending to create a structure to allow private capital to scale clean energy solutions in commercial real estate. And that wasn't happening. So it was hugely frustrating sitting in a foundation, very ivory tower-ish. You get the policy passed, everyone high fives, but no money's actually moving.
No action on the ground.
Nothing.
Right.
So I had the opportunity when the governor of Connecticut was elected, Governor Malloy, who was setting up the country's first green bank. He invited me to come up and help put together a commercial lending platform for the state of Connecticut that would drive private capital into clean energy. And I said, sure, I'm happy to do it.
So it was a state
It was a state agency. Right. So the Rockefeller Brothers Fund allowed me to take a year-long sabbatical. And they paid my salary to go up and do this work for the state. And we started a PACE program for the state of Connecticut. It's where I met my co-founder, Allie Cooley. She was right out of graduate school. She knew a hell of a lot about numbers and math and credit, and I knew a lot about policy and sales and marketing. And together we sort of built up this really cool state-based program.
Yeah.
And it was there that we realized there was a real business model around it. So that was the kind of interesting public sector stop along the route.
Who was your first customer?
Oh, that's a great question. So our first customer was a strip mall owner in Norwalk, Connecticut, 542 Westport Avenue. You probably know the building. It's
probably been in it.
There's a movie theater. There's a Bye Bye Baby.
Oh, I know.
Carter's.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I know exactly
totally.
where it is. Yeah,
So 542 Westport Avenue.
Bed Bath and Beyond.
Correct.
Yeah.
So building owner, we found him through a contractor. He needs a new HVAC system, wants to put in a solar system. We don't really know what we're doing, but we've got some money because the state has given us money to seed this program.
Yeah.
We make our first loan to these guys. Funny story, the governor was so excited about the first commercial PACE loan happening through this program that they called and said, we want to do a ribbon cutting. The governor's going to come out. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. We're really going to kind of get some momentum here. So he shows up. And the dirty little secret about what we finance is it's really boring stuff. Like it's really hard to make a new HVAC system look cool. So the governor and his whole team show up with, the media's there. I'm like, well, where should we do the ribbon cutting? I was like, well, it's in the basement. There's a chiller.
It's not a backdrop like this.
So it was probably the least interesting ribbon cutting ever. But that was our first customer, and we had a bunch of them, and we learned a ton along the way, and figured out the value proposition for commercial real estate owners, the value proposition for the public sector, and then ultimately the value proposition for institutional investors who really liked this kind of clean energy loan product that we were creating.
Yeah, and that's where you see real action on the ground, real change in clean energy, etc. Instead of just the policy side of it. It's like, okay, we can see the results of our work
there's this quote that I always think about that President Obama gave in one of his inaugurals that, if you want to remake America, you do it block by block, brick by brick, the same way it's always been done. And building a business, I've always kind of felt that way. The piece of it is, you've got to take it apart. You've got to think about it in kind of a modular build-up way. If you think about it too big, you get lost in it. Yeah. So the thing about our business that I've loved is, at the base level, we're upgrading individual parcels of real estate. You can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it, and that's how we got started.
Yeah, it's what's the other saying that comes to mind? How do you eat an elephant? One chunk at a time. Just piece at a time, piece at a time. Mm-hmm. And it's funny. I'm working with not just yourselves, but two other organizations that are affecting the climate. So one is a zero emissions shipping business. In fact, Pace Rally was a guest on Route to the Top, and I've just come off of a gig with Proterra, which is a zero emissions mass transportation company. So they're all into batteries and all that kind of stuff. But when you also talk to those, particularly you talk to Proterra, they're after a kind of zero waste cycle because they understand that actually where's the electricity coming from and also our buildings. And so you start to see, they would be an ideal client of yours to have a different kind of energy into the manufacturing. And so you can see how the whole thing can just start to snowball just across three clients of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about, what do you want to do in your business, right? But what we want to do is have a contribution to combating climate change. Yeah. Buildings are 60 to 80% of global emissions. So unless you figure out a way to decarbonize the built environment, you're just not going to get there on climate. Yeah. And my feeling was unless you figure out a way for it to become a smart business decision for a commercial real estate owners to do this, they're not going to do it because they care about the environment. Most of them aren't spending as much time outside as you or I probably does. Or
it's second order for them.
It's second order. And in some ways it has to be, right? They are motivated by profits. They've got boards to answer to, investors, customers. So you can't expect people to do things that are not in their economic interest.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you can do both.
Do both, right?
Win-win.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
That was the thing about this PACE policy that I kind of immediately fell in love with, which is it allows people to operate in their self-interest.
Yes.
And aligned self-interest is a very, very powerful force. And so we've created a way that building owners can really do right by doing well. And so it's
because you hear that mantra a lot at
Yeah.
ESG conferences
Totally.
and things like that.
Totally.
And it's like, yeah, we get it, but here it is in practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Greenworks London, that's when I first met you.
Yeah.
Yourself and Ali is the other co-founder. And we worked together a year and a half or so ago, and you were right in the middle of putting a deal together with Nuveen.
That's right.
So you want to talk about that evolution?
Well, funny story. The last check I ever wrote from my Greenworks lending checkbook was to Canvas. It was really right before the acquisition happened. So
I have a photograph of it.
That's good. I know. I was so worried that they were going to, change the accounting processes and it was going to slow us down. But so, started Greenworks in 2015 with Ali. You hit milestones along the way, and we grew really fast those first couple of years in terms of getting outside of Connecticut and turning it into a national lending platform. And it was, kind of end of 2019 that she and I sort of looked at each other like, well, what are we doing with this thing? How big is it going to get? And frankly, it starts to get a little, scary is the wrong word, but you start to feel ill-positioned as a specialty finance company approaching kind of $1 billion in assets under management with a team of the size we were growing to be. And you start to realize like, oh, yikes, like maybe we should like take seriously some of these risk protocols and build out the corporate structures that you need if you're moving that much money around. And neither of us had real aspirations and kind of like building back office systems. We both are kind of more impact motivated. And so we realized that the way to keep scaling Greenworks was to figure out an institutional home for it. So find an asset management company, a bank, somebody that had money, had kind of willingness to continue to invest in what we were building.
Infrastructure.
And the infrastructure, right? All that kind of back office that you need as you keep growing. So we ran a process. We started the sale process about a month before COVID. I'm trying to think. I think it was January. January, February.
Timing.
Yeah. Signed the engagement letter with the bank. We're going to do this, and then COVID hit. So the earliest marketing meetings, the company, I actually had COVID. We were in complete lockdown. Everything was on Zoom. So you never know how it's going to go, but we had great response. So people were really interested in what we were building. I think the fact that we were, well timed in terms of being an ESG company was really important. We had and continue to have kind of huge room for growth in front of us. So ran a process. Nuveen, who had been an early investor in our bonds, was one of the participants in the process. And if I'm being honest, that was sort of where we wanted to land because we knew them, they knew us, they knew the asset class, they were years ahead of some of the other kind of asset managers that were starting to sniff around the industry.
Right.
And people matter in things like this, right? And selling your company is a big step. Selling your company during COVID when you're kind of meeting people over Zoom and you're thinking like, are you going to make good on all the things you're promising? It's scary. So thankfully, Nuveen ended up, putting in an offer that was quite compelling, and we went with them. So we signed the sale agreement in February of last year. So we're kind of 18 months into what has been a fairly smooth transition from scrappy startup to one platform and $1 trillion asset management company.
Yeah, and it was. And I thank you for inviting me into a piece of that journey because I remember the first time meeting the whole team. There were about 50. Yeah, I think 52 of us.
Yeah, that's right.
In a room on a 2-day offsite in the first break of COVID.
That's right.
I think. In fact, I think another first for you. Yeah. For me was first group back in a room.
That's right.
Because all the work we'd been doing up until that point
was
virtual. So we 52 people in a room, and then a year later we repeat the cycle of the company offsite, and there's not a room big enough, so we're sort of 85 people, had to pick a different venue, get there. But the team you have, even through that growth and with the acquisition done by Nuveen, the feel of the group, the organization is still very much the same as it was. The energy, the youthfulness, the fun, the getting stuff done. Like from a culture standpoint, even through that growth, you've managed to hang on to that. You don't often see that. You see a lot of organizations kind of lose that. It's something you're really conscious of doing or not?
Absolutely. I think that is, if I think about what I'm doing lately, it's probably more of that than just about anything else.
Right.
So when we, started the company, there was, 3 people in a room kind of thing, 5 people in a room, 7 people in a room. And that initial group, there's probably 20 of us that have been around since the beginning. That same 20, that kind of energy level of that same 20 is something that we work hard to make sure we're kind of spreading through the organization. But I actually think you were one of the people that talked to us about this at one of our senior staff retreats, that you don't want the next wave of people to feel like they missed the good stuff, right? And sort of the lore of, those startup days when we had no money and
back in the day,
right?
Yeah.
Like there's a cool shared history there for those of us that were a part of it, and it's something that none of us will ever forget. But you want people to come in with that energy and feeling like they're building something, and that has been fun to try to figure out how do you do that? How do you give people agency to feel as though they're part of this next chapter, and this next chapter is going to be bigger. It's maybe we're not starting from a standstill the way we were when we opened the doors at Greenworks, but we've got huge aspirations to continue building out into new product lines, into new parts of the market, and the new team, the 88 people, it's going to be on them to help us do that because we've sort of brought them in to help continue to expand our impact.
It's this, culture spreads and gets transmitted via stories. And it's what are the new stories that new people in the organization are telling themselves. And when we were in that offsite in June, just hanging out with folks at the end of the day, hearing their stories and what they're excited about and what they've been working on and stuff, you can see that, continuing to build as the next generation sort of comes through the organization.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it, having never built a company or led a company before this one, some of those skills were learned during COVID, because one of the things that was really challenging, even before the acquisition and the transition, was, what do you do with, the 50 people that we had who all of a sudden went from seeing each other every single day in an office to seeing each other on Zoom very infrequently kind of thing.
And very transactionally when you are on
Exactly.
Zoom.
You're kind of teamsing someone when you need something or you need information, but not, asking how their weekend was in the same way. So how do you kind of maintain culture remotely? And that is, something we're certainly not alone in having dealt with, but I think it's sort of, we did a good job during that period of time of kind of deepening the connections. And so when we went through the acquisition and the transition, some of that kind of soft tissue was strong enough to kind of sustain us. And we didn't lose a single member of our senior team through the acquisition.
Through the whole time.
Which is, there's no wood around here.
No, we're a long way away from wood at this point.
But that was sort of one of the, if I think back of, what did I want to accomplish, in that first year, it was really to make sure that we kept our leadership team intact because they're awesome. I mean,
they sure are.
them. They're smart, they're driven, they're ethical, they're great leaders, they're great thinkers. And they're that story, right? It's them that we need to kind of get that next wave of leaders.
Truly are the fabric of
That's right. Yeah. So we were really lucky, and I think hopefully a little bit of testament to me, but I think in part Nuveen, they were really good at making sure that they kept us all as a group intact.
They know that's important. Yeah. The last thing they need is acquire a company and then the leadership team disappears and the place implodes.
But you hear that all the time, right? Like I got that question so often after we sold. People are like, the chopping block. Are they cutting everybody? I was like, no, just the opposite. Like we're still in growth mode here. We're adding. So that's been reassuring.
Yes. So you gave me a little opening a moment ago because you mentioned the word leadership, and you obviously know that's a big chunk of my business and what I do. So as you look back over your career, what are the biggest, most obvious sort of transformational leadership learning moments for you? What was happening and what did you learn?
Man, there's a lot. And always easier to pick them out of the rearview mirror because when they're happening, they don't feel like leadership moments. They feel like crises. Right when we started Greenworks, the way we capitalized our business was that we partnered up with a fund that was buying our loans. So we were the originators and they were the capital, right? And that was just kind of the initial structure of the company. And our ability to originate depended on their willingness to buy our loans, right? So we had to kind of work very closely with them. And it became pretty clear about 3 or 4 months into our relationship with this group that they just weren't going to buy them. They didn't understand the asset class. They were basically just going to starve us for resources and say no to everything. And so we weren't going to be able to grow on the origination side because we had nowhere to put our loans. And we had our 2 initial investors in the company, were kind of the third board seat, me, Allie, and then these investors who were tremendous. And we had a board meeting, and Allie and I sort of laid out to them, like, hey, we're kind of stuck here. Like, they're saying no to everything, and we've got this agreement with them where we can't.
And we have more business. We have more originations than
they are willing to. Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're going to say no to everything, but they also aren't going to let us raise any additional money or structure a new facility with somebody else. So they basically got us between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Pun intended. And I remember on that board call, our investor, who was a good friend, and he himself was an entrepreneur and had started a company, which is a great investor to have.
Yeah.
He basically looked at me and said, you have to call them and you have to get out of this.
Yeah.
Like, your business is dead. Like, take it that seriously. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, wow, this is like the first real test of, are we going to survive? Because it was that binary. Like, they basically were going to lock us out. And so I, put on my big girl pants and got on the phone and asked for a meeting with the head of this group and sat down with him and said, listen, you got to let us out. Like, we have to figure out a pathway here. And we did. It was a bit painful.
Yeah.
It cost us. But everything comes back around, and we certainly ended up on top from that. And I learned a lot. It was like, okay, like there's going to be hard moments here, and it's going to be on me. It was the first moment of like, holy shit, like there's no grown-ups in the room. I have to be the one to do this. You are it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's conflict, and it's influencing, and it's people, and it's
totally,
the business. It's all of that stuff wrapped up in moments.
It's exactly. And it was like all of this that we'd been building and thinking about and planning for. It was yes or no. Like are we going to be able to do this or not? And you learn a lot, and you gain confidence when you get through that, because like, oh man, if you had asked me if I thought I could do that, I would have said no, but you just had to.
Yeah. Well, it's noticing the situation.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot. Executives and leaders' ability to notice the situation and position that they're in. It's the contextualization of a moment, and then deciding what to do. That board meeting was there, and then actually taking that action and getting on with it.
Exactly.
And executing on something, and then when you see that being tough, but being the right decision and the right answer for the organization, the next time it's easier, and the next time it's easier, and the next time it's easier. I think for me personally, this fly's going to there's flies, to everybody on the cameras
I'm not
here,
like losing my mind.
Yeah, that's like, I'm on the back of the head. So one fly is very interested in this little patch in the back of my head.
The one's trying to get my nose. I will say that experience, though, for me, I learned that other people putting confidence in me is a huge motivator for me, because fear of failure, I guess, is one way to think about it. But I have this sense of like never wanting to let anyone down, and like if they thought I could do it, I could do it.
Well, it's interesting that investor said, "You got to go do this."
You got to do it. Yeah,
not
totally.
I'll do this, or somebody else should do it. It was like, Jessica, you got to go do this.
This is you. Like there's no one else to make that call.
This is the job.
Yeah, this is the job. Right. It was one of those moments. So that would be one leadership moment. But there was a lot along the way.
So you touched on another thing there. You said you kind of touched on a trait. You're a nice person, is what you said. So as you think about yourself and your own leadership, how would you describe yourself?
So I would say I'm. I don't know how I would describe myself.
Right. How
as a leader.
would others describe you? I know how I would describe you, but I'm not interviewing me.
I would say I'm sort of like a pretty good cheerleader. I'm a good positive reinforcement type person, where if you get really talented people around you, you've just got to figure out what's holding them back and try to remove barriers for them.
Yeah. So you're also a good noticer and attractor of talent as well.
I think that's right.
You think about your leadership team. You walk into a room and there's like this impressive group of people that you've gathered.
Right. And make them want to stay with you because they trust you.
Yeah.
I think most people would agree that I'm trustworthy. I'm if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If I can't, I'll tell you I can't, but I don't like to make promises I can't keep. You know, I have good people skills where I can read people pretty quickly and sort of understand where they're coming from, what's motivating them, what they're afraid of, what's going to make them get to the next level.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of just being a people person and being an extrovert and being someone who gets energy from other people, I think others, feed off me with that, and kind of keeping people motivated. I don't know how else I would describe myself as a leader.
That's pretty good going. So I'll come at it from the other way, the yin to the yang with Ali. Because, obviously you've been together for a while, running both Greenworks and now Nuveen Green Capital. And you said earlier on, you had the policy expertise and she had the numbers expertise. But there are also differences in how the two of you lead as well. So how do you come at it from the differences and similarities between the two of you?
We are in some ways incredibly similar, but you have to get to a couple of levels down to find the similarities, because we lead very differently and our styles are very differently. So I am much more external. I am much more outgoing. I am an optimist. I generally just think things are going to work out. I am not analytical. I am not a numbers person. I, break things regularly.
Such as?
Well, just,
things.
kind of just, move fast and break things kind of. I make decisions very quickly. I have a high degree of confidence in those decisions, even when I maybe ought not. Allie, on the other hand, she basically has all of the skills that I lack. So we really complement each other well. She's certainly very externally focused as well, but not as much of an extrovert. She is for sure the smartest person I've ever met, bar none in my life. She can see a problem, unwrap it, rewrap it, take it apart, put it back together, and get to an answer that nobody even knew was possible. And she has, done that over and over again. And my ability to move fast and break things is only because she would never let me break anything big.
Right. You have the confidence that she's going to catch you if you fall.
That's right. Like she's...
Or she's not going to let you fall in the first place.
She's not, right? Because we've done everything together from, every big decision we've ever made has been the two of us in agreement on it. And so if it was ever kind of like a big thing that she needed to be like, wait, are we sure we want to do this? Then we'd kind of walk it back. But her kind of nervousness is the wrong word, but ability to see potential downside has been critical throughout, like all sorts of times.
Yeah,
that's
she's
come in handy.
Good risk manager.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and you can see that in the room.
Yeah.
When you're working with the two of you in front of a group, or how you think differently, but it never looks or feels like you're not on the same page.
That's right.
That's the trick. It's just like we have different strengths, but collaborate really well together, and that gets seen by the organization. Yeah.
Well, and I think I generally think of, what could go right, and she generally thinks of what can go wrong, and you put those two things together, you get great outcomes.
Great
right?
balance.
Because you're always moving forward because we're both that way, but we're doing it in a way that is both kind of speedy and responsible.
Yeah. So that's great. The last time you didn't know what to do?
The last time I didn't, I mean, this morning probably. Getting up that rock wall. Yeah. So for me, I would say I was pretty clear on what year one Jessica Bailey, CEO of Nuveen Green Capital, needed to do in terms of getting through the acquisition, merging all of our systems, doing the bed checks to make sure everyone was okay and happy and staying and fulfilled and had what they needed to be successful. Year two feels a little more like white space for me. So I would say for the first time in a long time in my career, I have like the space to think about what I should be doing, and I don't have the right structure or I've not put the right structure around me to take advantage of that.
Okay.
And so, you keep busy doing the things that need to get done, and there's always plenty of them to fill up any day. But in terms of actually kind of transforming fully into what this next chapter looks like, I think I'm definitely in a moment where I need to spend a bit more time thinking about it.
Yeah. But at least you recognize that you're in that moment to think about it,
that's right.
as opposed to just let the situation wash over you.
Well, that's right. And I've always operated on the mantra, like, to those who much is given, much is expected. And I feel like we now have this like huge new platform with all of these resources and this mandate and this brand, and kind of, again, it's like, it's on me to think about what we do with that, right? And so how do you take advantage of the new set of opportunities that are in front of us?
Yeah. And we also have an interesting time in the country at the moment,
totally.
with looming recession,
Exactly.
Ups and downs of the market, everything that's going on in Europe, etc.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a volatile market, but I think no longer being the CEO of a startup feels very different than it once did.
Yeah,
it's just a different job.
Yeah. Well, you think I just sort of reflecting on the transition moments in your life.
Yeah.
If you think about, transition from the policy work that you did with the states into, founding a business, into now being in another big transitions that happen.
Yeah.
A lot of entrepreneurs, people who start up a business, it's a slow, organic, it just gets bigger over a longer period of time instead of big transitions into things that are very different.
Very different.
So I think it's appropriate. You're in the space of reflection and what is this next chapter going to look like and be like, not just for you, but for the organization and everybody in it.
No, and I think it's something that you have to dedicate time to thinking about, though. And that's what is hard to do, because there's always another fire to put out. So it's like, okay, we have this amazing team. You asked me on the way up, is it hard to be out in Colorado? And in some ways, like, it's a lot less hard than it once was, because if it used to be, time was, if I wasn't involved in something, it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
And now we are at a size and a scale where most things that happen, I'm not involved in. It's like a fundamental shift of what your role is, of being a day-to-day operator in like the nuts and bolts of your business, to being in a structure where you need to obviously know what's going on in your business, but you're not the one doing it anymore.
Yeah. I remember that shift, not in my current role, but in a previous role, where you shift into that kind of next level.
Yeah.
And the danger is you don't recognize it to begin with, and you don't then lean into it, right? It just, I have time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Man, what do I do with this? How do I fill these units of time that I now have? And, getting more strategic, getting more external input, getting out, the things that will fuel whatever helps you think.
That's right.
Bigger, broader, better. But it's so really difficult if you have been in this frenzied kind of done everything, been involved in everything, can fix everything, to then flip into a completely different way of behaving. You see it a lot with CEOs who still have have a lot of client relationships. That there's a tension, and I call it sort of how many modes have you been in today? It's like, okay, I've been in the strategic thinking mode. I've been in the talking to clients mode. I've then been in the, take the kids to school mode. And then I've been, and the switching.
Yeah, the channel changing.
In a day, actually is really taxing on the brain. Your brain would actually much rather just be in doing one mode the whole time. It just gets used to it. It's lazy, right? As opposed to, I got to go from this to this to this to this to this. And that's why a lot of organizations struggled through COVID, because all of a sudden all of their employees were thrown into, whether they liked it or not, a situation where they were at least switching 2 or 3 different ways in their minds.
Well, right, trying to work out of their kitchen when their kids are homeschooling next to them.
Yeah, with somebody else is working on something else, and this, that, and you didn't have to do that switch, because you could go to work and you would be in that situation, then you come back again. But that ability to notice, what mode am I in right now? What mode do I need to be in? And then how am I going to be when I'm in that space is really important.
Yeah. Well, I find for myself, I am so much more motivated, high energy, fulfilled when I'm out in the market, right? Talking to clients, talking to investors, talking to partners. I am not a great sort of behind the computer CEO. It drains me dealing with, the latest IT challenge or, some kind of new HR system that's being rolled out, all the kind of internal stuff. It's really important. I know it needs to happen, and I've had to play a role in it to make sure that everything kind of transitioned. But man, that is energy sucking for me versus energy giving.
Yeah. And that's another good thing is percentage of time in that space. You've got to do a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
But not
and just know that.
But not the majority
exactly.
of it.
Just be aware. Okay, today's going to be one of those days. I've got to get these things done. I am not going to walk out of here thinking I'm taking over the world because I'm going to be low energy. But that's okay. We'll get back to the other stuff soon.
Cool. So I was gonna finish with what next, but we kind of did the what next. It sounds like time to think, be strategic, be more external.
Yeah.
Taking the organization to the next level. Now you're doing what you're doing.
I think I'm in the right spot. It's just how do you figure out what to do in that spot? So that's kind of what I'm spending some time trying to figure out.
Nice. So I asked this question on my last route to the top, and the person I asked couldn't answer it.
Oh, so because they didn't get this high.
They didn't get this high. They didn't have the altitude headaches that we've got. So let's give this a go. What's one question I should have asked you that I haven't?
Why did you think you could be successful starting a company?
Go.
I didn't. So I get asked that question a lot. How did you know you could do it? And I did not start out thinking of myself as an entrepreneur. I never thought that I would start a company. I certainly never thought I would start a company in the financial services industry. So there is
and sell a company.
And now work at one of the largest global asset managers in the world. So all of those things, if you and I were sitting up here 10 years ago, I would have laughed at you and said you were insane. That I will have a business card that says, Nuveen Asset Management on it. That will never happen. And I look back and I'm like, how did this all happen? And Allie and I disagree with which one of us said we should start a company. I think it was her. She thinks it was me.
Right.
We'll never know. But it was one of those, like when we were hiking today, and you're just shorten your steps, right? Go one foot in front of the other, but if you're out of breath, just shorten your steps. And it has just felt like that. I don't feel like I made any decisions, which sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But it was all these little micro small step decisions that kind of led here. It was
so you didn't have that big vision that you're going to build this and work towards it.
No, not at all. It was this little policy that I heard about at a foundation, little step. Get it passed across the country, little step. Yeah. Try and go to Connecticut and see if we can make it work, little step. It's working in Connecticut. Let's, leave Connecticut and see if we can do it around the country, little step. Yeah. It got really big. We should probably figure out what to do with it. There were all these kind of little steps. They sound big in retrospect, but at the time, they were just one foot in front of the other.
One foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you will, I don't think you'd be surprised if you speak to a lot of people. It's the same for them. It's the accidental CEO.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just huh?
Right. I'm doing this?
What just happened? As opposed to those that have kind of been groomed and bred in large organizations that have been on a career track and it's all figured out. And as long as they perform well and do the things that they're probably going to end up there.
Yeah. Well, I also think the difference between being the CEO of a company and being the startup CEO of a company is I got to give myself the title. Nobody ever.
Yeah, that's right.
No one ever gave me.
Nobody ever gave it to you.
Right?
Yeah.
It was just
you have imposter syndrome every now and again. I did. I felt the same thing. I was just okay, as I have this fancy title, but I basically just gave it to myself. And it would cost me about $3,000 to incorporate a company and give myself that title.
There's a definite positive. The first time you have business cards printed up with a logo you made up in a title you gave yourself. You're is this fake?
Is it,
is this a Ponzi scheme?
Is this how it really works?
Totally.
Yeah. But, it's the opposite of that. You know exactly what you're doing. You're well known in the industry now. When I asked you when was the last time you were interviewed, it was yesterday, right?
For sure.
It's you filled that space and you've become that CEO.
Yeah. Well, and I think as you get older, you realize nobody really knows what they're doing. So it's okay just to like call it and be like, hey, listen, like we're doing the best we can. We're going to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
But, you know, nobody's ever started a company just like ours. So there's no blueprint. You just kind of one step in front of the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna finish there.
All right.
I think that's the best way to end this whole thing. Thank you so much
Yes.
for being crazy enough to come and put one foot in front of the other.
I know.
Up here. It is gorgeous.
Thanks. This is
Awesome.
great.
So good. Thanks.
Talk to you.
Okay.